Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
And with just 6 weeks to go of the 2023 hurricane season, things are quieting down a little bit. We're still tracking an Atlantic disturbance that does have a high chance of developing here over the next couple of days into at least a tropical depression. But things are a lot quieter than they have been for a lot of the season, which is always good news. Welcome into today's edition of Tracking the Tropics. It is October 18th. And of course, we've got a full panel of meteorologists joining us today. Familiar face, WFLA meteorologist Rebecca Berry, and today's featured meteorologist, WKRG's Grant Skinner. Thanks for joining us today.
And thanks so much, Rebecca and Amanda. I'm glad to be here. It's definitely been a interesting season, so glad to talk about it.
So much to talk about. Every single week, we kind of have the same discussion, but it's evolving every single week as well, which is a very interesting, Rebecca.
Absolutely. And so the season started off with, we knew that it was going to be a strong El Nino year, and we were talking about what this year was going to do to those storms, and then those unprecedented warm waters. And it was the battle between the warm waters and the battle between the shear, and the warm waters seemed to win out. The shear just really didn't show up this year, and we were kind of attributing the warm waters and the lack of difference between the warm waters in the Atlantic and the warm waters to the Pacific to that lack of shear. But it's certainly been an active season, although not many of those storms made it close to home, which is good.
Yeah, we had, of course, Idalia, a couple along the East Coast there, but none really were in the peak of hurricane season, which is always nice, and things are a lot quieter. We are tracking Invest 94L. Want to talk a little bit about the forecast of this system because it's been talked about for several days now. The forecast models have actually had kind of a hard time at the evolution of this storm. It's still not a fully organized system. That means it's still organizing that center of circulation. The National Hurricane Center is still keeping an eye on it as well. So take a closer look at satellite for you. Again, just it's an area of low pressure right now. Obviously, there's a lot of shower and thunderstorm activity associated with it, but the National Hurricane Center giving it a high chance of developing here over the next, really, at any point. It could become a depression, it could become a tropical storm, could become our next named storm. The real question is where is it going whenever it does end up developing? And the good news is those forecast models do recurve it away from the United States. However, the northern section of the Lesser Antilles, even some of the Caribbean islands, Puerto Rico, should continue to watch this a little bit because it could be a rainmaker, could bring some wind to some of the Caribbean islands here as we head into the weekend. And then as we head into next week, it does look like it is going to recurve. There's a strong consensus with the forecast models that it is going to make its way out to sea, and that is because we have a cold front making its way through the United States, which is going to bring us good weather to the state of Florida. It's going to bring us good weather to the southeast, and it's also going to help to push this out to sea. So kind of a win-win situation for at least the folks of the United States. Here's what I'm talking about. We have that area of high pressure in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean helping to kind of steer this across the Atlantic. But we also have that cold front starting to dip down into the United States. And what we're going to see happen is that cold front's going to push down, the jet stream's going to dip in, and it's basically going to be squeezed in between what's left of this cold front and then what is that area of high pressure. It's going to be kind of squeezed in between all of it. So we're going to get to reap the benefits of the cold front. It's going to be a great weekend, and it's also going to keep this system rather weak and push it out to sea heading into next week. But if we talk about that cold front just a little bit more, it is a dip in the jet stream, and I know this is tracking the tropics here, but because that cold front is going to push this system out to sea, that does mean we are going to feel the effects of something, and that means we're actually going to see a cool down for a lot of the eastern half of the United States this weekend. This is kind of the bigger picture of the jet stream and the steering currents. We talk a lot about that here on Tracking the Tropics, and it's going to bring some cooler temperatures to much of the eastern half of the United States while it sweeps that system out to sea. Next week, though, we are going to have to watch kind of the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to be watching an area of high pressure developing in the Gulf of Mexico, and it does look like it is going to turn warm once again. So Not unusual for us to be tracking a system at this point in October, Rebecca and Grant, but where it's coming from is a little bit unusual for this time of year. Typically, we would look a little bit closer to home for systems forming in the middle of October, but this is actually, it was a tropical wave that came off the coast of Africa.
Yeah.
That's right. And we've had these tropical waves continue to move off the west coast of Africa, even into the back part of the season. I think they've had the opportunity to still continue to develop thanks to those warmer water temperatures. Of course, our typical development area during this time of the season would be closer to home, off the East Coast and also into portions of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. But we are seeing these tropical waves continue to develop, and they maintain at least some sort of intensity as they make their way west. The good news is they don't have the fuel they need to become those stronger storms before they make it closer to our area, and the overall steering patterns do push them away. So that's been a good thing for us here. I think synoptically everything's been able to kind of stay off to our east, which means most of them have been fish storms, as people would call it. But overall, though, we still have, again, and even at this part of the season, seeing those tropical waves continue to develop with the tropical moisture and warm water temperatures.
And I want to remind our viewers that this is an interactive broadcast, and so you can ask a question, especially what that insight Grant just provided if you have any questions about that. But you do have to use a hashtag for us to be able to see your comments. And the hashtag that you have to use, you can use hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey Grant, or hashtag Hey Rebecca, and that allows us to grab your comment, pull it up on screen, and then answer those questions as they come in. And one thing that I'm kind of begging for after this season is maybe breaking down the typical development zones by El Nino versus La Nina. I think these generic tropical development zones serve us most years, but on odd years like this, it would be really helpful to say, if you do have a ton of shear, you're going to look further north for those storms to form, and that's what's causing that plethora of fish storms basically that we've seen this season.
Yeah, I completely agree, and anomalous years in terms of how hot our water temperatures have been, right? It was kind of difficult at the beginning of the year because, well, we had record warm water temperatures, and when you have record of something, you don't have a lot of years in the past to compare it to. So eventually, getting a database of some of the anomalous years that we've seen just within the past 5 years, we've seen some strange patterns. But Grant, this year has been strange in particular because, Rebecca, you mentioned it at the beginning of the stream, the El Nino versus the water temperatures. El Nino didn't really seem to show up, but it seemed to show up last week when we had that system kind of move through the Gulf of Mexico. So what has been your take kind of tracking the tropics this season so far? It's a little bit quieter now, but we've been tracking a lot, somewhat, in terms of the entire season as a whole.
Yeah, there's been a lot of activity, more than, of course, that we expected. We've had a lot of named systems. Again, of course, fortunately, we've been able to mainly track them out at sea thanks to that shear. But we're on the upper end of that forecast, of course, in terms of named tropical storms, a little bit higher than CSU, and on the higher end of NOAA's forecast. And overall, I think a lot of that is attributed to those warm water temperatures. We've had very anonymously warm temperatures over many portions of our prime development regions, especially during the prime part of the season as well, into August and September when we have our peak part of the season. So I think it's mainly attributed to that. Of course, last week was nice in order to have some of those cooler, of course, we typically see cooler and wetter conditions when we get into that, El Nino pattern over the Gulf Coast. And we were able to get a taste of that last week. We got some much needed rain here on the coastline. It has been very dry, especially in areas like Louisiana, where they have not had a lot of rain at all over the past several months. It was nice to have a little batch of rain during that time period. And then we had that low that came close. And I actually was out with our weather vehicle tracking that at the coastline. We got tropical wind gusts from that. Of course, it was not a tropical system, but it was interesting to see that pattern set up compared to what we've had throughout the rest of the season, because the rest of the season it has been, again, anonymously warm in the Gulf, throughout the Gulf of Mexico and in the tropical Atlantic. We've had a lot of systems develop, although most of them have stayed away from the Gulf of Mexico. We've seen a lot develop, and of course 6 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes. Of course, we had Idalia, which impacted portions of the Big Bend. So we still have had a system impact the Gulf Coast, but I think it's not been as active along the Gulf Coast, which is good. I mean, it was good to see that. But overall, a lot of activity still, even in this what would be an El Nino year.
Yeah, and what would be in a strong El Nino year,
Yeah.
we would typically not be tracking nearly as many storms, but of course we always do say, it only takes one storm, whether, that's the only storm of the season or, it's one of many. So, you got to prepare regardless. But obviously in this case, this year, we have seen and tracked a number of storms, 19 tropical storms. Of course, you see the little asterisk there. There was one unnamed storm in January that the National Hurricane Center went back and reviewed some data, said that there was a storm there. So technically, we've only gone through 18 of the names, but there's been 19 total storms. So the last storm was Sean. If 94L ends up becoming a tropical storm, it would get the name Tammy. And it's just remarkable to see that we have gone through this many names on the list this year. I really didn't think that we were going to get through this many names, but I mean, we're just 3 away now from possibly using the alternative named list. The good news is, Grant and Rebecca, that, even after 94L, it really actually doesn't look like there's a lot of other things on the horizon in those longer range forecasts. Yes. Fingers crossed.
Right. Yes, hoping that things stay quiet long term after this. Of course, we have been tracking some waves. I think they will in the long term, hopefully, stay weaker and kind of be sheared away, especially by these synoptic scale systems that keep pushing through the U.S. So
it's also striking how many tropical storms we've had this season versus actual hurricanes. When you're looking at the list here now, tropical storm. Well, there's a hurricane, back to tropical storms. It's just pretty weak systems out there, but the ones that did develop became major hurricanes very quickly.
Right. Yeah, we had 3 major hurricanes, and all of them being at least a 4 or a 5. Lee was, of course, a 5, a very strong 5, and it became a 5 so quickly. But those storms did kind of move over the same areas and actually used up a good amount of energy in those areas of the Atlantic, which was nice. Still a ton of warm waters, though, in the Caribbean, which again is where we do look a little bit closer to home in these last couple of months of hurricane season. So we do have to watch those areas a little bit closer for that possible development right now. Again, it doesn't really look like anything on the long range horizon that the forecast models are picking up on, but when we do look at those October hurricanes that are, in the vicinity of Florida and in the Tampa Bay area, we call it the turn zone because those cold fronts, the same cold front that is, coming in on Friday, that's sweeping this one out to sea. If this storm was a little bit closer, it might have tracked across the state because of that cold front starting to turn it. So we do have to watch that area a little bit. We're not done with hurricane season just yet, but I do like the way things are going with these stronger fronts that are coming through at a much quicker pace. Typically, we have to wait a little bit longer to see these fronts push all the way through. But hey, I will take it.
Exactly. And you parlayed perfectly into our first question. Remember, you can use the hashtag and ask us a question. You have to use hashtag #HeyRebecca, hashtag #HeyAmanda, or hashtag #HeyGrant for us to be able to see your question. And the first question coming in from the WFLA Facebook page: what's the chance of us getting a storm in the Gulf before the season is over? And since you were just talking about that, Amanda, I'm going to send that question over to you.
Yeah, so I just kind of loaded up the tropical development zones for November because we do still kind of look in this same general area for that possible development. But I'll go back to one of the graphics that I started with here at the beginning of our Tracking the Tropics episode, and just kind of talking about this front that's coming through on late Friday into early Saturday. If this front was a little bit weaker and was stalled out it was kind of draped across through the Gulf, across the peninsula of Florida, and then into the Atlantic, and it was just kind of hanging out there, with some showers and thunderstorms, some unsettled weather, the chances of us getting a storm in the Gulf of Mexico would be a lot higher in the near term, but that's not what's going to happen with this one. This one does look like it's going to kind of push all the way south. We're going to get this big area of high pressure come in and kind of clear us out for a little bit, which is good news. We don't want any shower and thunderstorm activity near the Gulf of Mexico, near the Caribbean at this point, because it could potentially tap into that energy. So the likelihood of us getting something in the near term, I would say the next 10 days, is very low, but we still kind of do have to watch for the rest of the season. All of November, it's certainly still in play, but luckily those storms typically don't end up being very strong.
That is the good news with the cooler waters. We don't look for those monsters 4 and 5 systems this time of the year. I think I'm trying to remember the December storm that caught me off guard a couple of years ago so badly, but that one ended up being pretty weak as well.
Yeah, we call them rainmakers at that point, right? Rain with a name because they produce a little bit of wind. But Grant, you were just talking about the drought. We need the rain here along the Tampa Bay coastline. That's our current drought monitor. It was actually last updated last Thursday. And then, if I zoom out here, you'll see the drought situation for parts of the deep south, Louisiana, portions of Texas. I mean, just an extreme and exceptional drought out there because of how dry it's been.
Yes, a big lack of rain throughout the past several months, and even back into, a couple weeks ago, I was showing a lot of graphics on air talking about some of these numbers over the past couple of months, in the sense that we've had just such little rain in the past couple of months. In the month of August, we had a lot of ridge patterns that set up over portions of the eastern U.S., bringing a lot of high pressure, and with that, really hot temperatures. And then we also had, of course, really humid conditions of the coastline. So we had really high heat index values for any parts of August, but we also had our record high temperature in Mobile during the month of August. So we had so many anonymously not so great things happen in the month of August in terms of the really hot temperatures and not a lot of rain. We're finally getting some of these, again, cold fronts that are bringing in some of that moisture and some a little bit of rainfall over the past couple of weeks, especially. But even into last week, it was a brief batch of rain. Most of the rain was along the coastline. Still some places getting some drought relief, but then right after that, we had drier air moving in, cooler air moving in, and that settled in place, and not as many rain chances came after that. We stay pretty dry from that point forward, and even into this week with that front that's moving through, especially for our area along the Gulf Coast, so the northern Gulf Coast from Jackson County, Mississippi, all the way over to Destin, Florida. We're not expecting as much rain with this system because it's just a weaker system for us. Now, for areas off to the northeast, those might see more of rain, and they'll also see cooler temperatures. But for areas along the Gulf Coast, I'm not seeing a whole lot of relief for our area anytime soon because of the lack of rain chances.
Yeah, Grant, does that concern you, your current drought situation and lack of rain that we're seeing with this front and possibly fronts in the future, right? You hear the saying, drought causes drought. Does that concern you heading into dry season here, and does the possibility of El Nino give you hope for more rain heading into winter and spring?
Well, especially over the past week or so, seeing the more of an El Nino pattern set up, I have a little bit of hope, but I still am quite concerned because we are heading into that dry season where we do see fronts move through, but we don't necessarily see a lot of rainfall. We typically don't see higher rainfall totals with these systems until we get back into the springtime, March, April, May, when we have those fronts that come through that typically bring more severe weather as well along with it. So I definitely am concerned, especially because we're supposed to, we typically have a lot of rainfall, especially during the summertime with those sea breeze thunderstorms. But because of these ridge patterns setting up, it's really stifled anything from being able to develop especially along the coastline where we have those storms typically.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that one, because that was where I was going next with the El Nino, the severe storms. Rebecca, we have been talking about this for the past week now. The El Nino storm the storm that came through last week was very similar to what we could continue to see with the El Nino pattern setting up heading into winter and spring. And yes, it is going to possibly bring us more severe weather. We had 6 confirmed tornadoes here in the Tampa Bay area, just in our viewing area alone with that system last week. That was significant for our area. We don't see that kind of thing happen. Yeah, maybe a water spout or two here, but we had, of those 6, 2 of them were EF2 tornadoes. So, Rebecca, I know we are going to be watching the El Nino pattern closely heading into winter and spring.
Yes, and so we just don't get those EF2s. We don't get the powerful tornadoes like you see a little bit further north. And unfortunately, they did move through right in the dead of night, which is the most dangerous situation for the South, because we don't have tornado sirens, we don't have basements. And so middle of the night tornadoes are a real threat for the entire Southeast. And it was odd for us to see that, but it did give me a little bit of hope that it might help with with the drought. Like maybe we will finally get the rain. And we actually got a question on your Facebook page, #HeyAmanda, will it be windy? So with the El Nino pattern, do you expect it to be a windier winter?
You know, with these systems coming through at times, yeah, it could absolutely be on the windier tropical kind of feeling side, but it's also going to be a little bit cooler with the cloud cover, and possibly these bigger dips in the jet stream as well, the northern jet stream. We could see some cooler temperatures, but overall, the windier pattern, yes and no. At times, it definitely could be on the windier side because of the systems kind of coming through. And there are areas of low pressure that may not be fully tropical, right? But they're still getting some of their energy from the subtropical jet stream, picking up on some of that energy, and the water temperatures could help to feed that just a little bit as well.
I'm hoping for some rain because the spring fire danger will be terrible if we do not basically get tons of rain this winter.
Yeah, and I'm gonna zoom back into kind of our specific area for Tampa Bay, and our drought is kind of confined in our coastal counties at this point. Our inland areas actually did see somewhat of a decent amount of rain over the summer, but yeah, Grant, just like you said, you didn't really get those summertime thunderstorms. We didn't either. It was a very, very weird summer for us. So our coastal counties, especially Sarasota, Manatee, Southern Hillsborough, there's a significant drought down there. But just looking at the southeast as a whole, and even into just portions of Texas and Louisiana, and even in your area, the drought is widespread, not just confined to a little portion of your viewing area.
Right. And I was recently talking to a friend of mine, a meteorologist over in Louisiana, Lafayette, Louisiana, talking to him about the drought situation over there and the fire situation. And it is continued to worsen. We haven't had a whole lot of significant rain in that area. Also back into Jackson, Mississippi, all the way down through Jackson County, Mississippi. So you're talking now Goshen, down through like Moss Point, Mississippi, and down on the coastline there. They've had a really bad drought situation as well. But over the past few weeks, what we've seen happen is that extreme drought has stretched in now Mobile, Baldwin counties. So Mobile proper, areas further north like Bay Minette, and along the coastline there, then also into Escambia County, Alabama, so into Atmore as well. We've had worsening drought conditions. But across the board, we have at least severe drought in areas as far east as Fort Walton Beach, Destin, those beach areas that typically see more rain with those summertime thunderstorms that just did not get a lot throughout the past few months. So like we were talking about, it's very concerning, especially going into the dry season. I'm hoping for some more rain with these cold fronts coming through, but as of now, it's just been very dry. And of course, a fire situation that's in Louisiana, especially into Jackson, and even into our area, we've had a couple of wildfires that have not been good. So it is definitely concerning.
Yeah, it's been a nice, refreshing treat and change of pace because of the record heat that you talked about you had in August. We had an incredibly hot and muggy summer here, and I think a lot of people have been excited about the fall weather the past couple of weeks here, which is great. But we still have to kind of look into the future, and unfortunately, it does look like we're at least watering our lawns now for a little bit. Rainy season is certainly over, if it really ever even started for us. But Grant, so for the rest of the tropical season, as our featured meteorologist today, kind of what are you going to be looking for the rest of October into November? Are you going to be watching for any more of those tropical waves coming off the coast? Are you going to be watching for any of these fronts to stall in the Gulf of Mexico and possibly help us with that drought?
I definitely could see some fronts stalling out, bring us some of that tropical moisture, maybe not becoming a fully tropical system, but at least bring some tropical moisture to those much needed areas that need it. Hopefully Louisiana can get some much needed rain with maybe not a tropical system, but something that brings tropical moisture to those areas like we saw last week. But overall, in terms of across the board and tropical development over the next couple of months, I think we'll continue to see that lessen greatly. Of course, we typically see that anyway, but if this El Nino pattern especially sets up and becomes firm in place and becomes more dominant over especially portions of the southeastern United States, I think that we will definitely see less systems, weaker systems, and of course, as these fronts get out into the tropical Atlantic, that will of course bring that shear to weaken them considerably. We could still see some waves. I still think they could have a little bit of development, especially with there just being anomalously warm temperatures over the tropical Atlantic over the past several months, but In addition to that, because of some of these stronger fish storms we've seen in the tropical Atlantic, that has helped to eat up a lot of the energy in specific areas. I know over the past couple of weeks, we're kind of looking at some of those areas that saw, those more powerful hurricanes in the tropical Atlantic, and they now have cooler water temperatures, of course, because of that. So I'm looking for things to lessen in terms of intensity, but there is still that energy that is in portions of the Caribbean. I think with these fronts, though, I don't think we'll see as much activity out into the Caribbean, but it's something to still watch. It's important, even though we see less activity at this part of the year, to have your hurricane plan in place and have, always have multiple ways to receive warnings, not only for tropical weather, but for severe weather as well. And to just stay informed as much as you can, because even though, again, things are going to look quieter, we'll have more fronts move through, I still think it's important to stay on top of things, especially because this tropical season isn't just during the peak. It's several months throughout the year.
Yes, and luckily we're kind of on the backside of, this hurricane season at this point. But I completely agree, Grant. We can't let our guard down just yet. And again, even heading into the winter and spring months for the Southeast, we'll have to watch for the threat of those severe storms with this El Nino pattern setting up, because at the end of the day, it's all connected, right? So, tracking the tropics will come to an end at the end of November, but we will still be tracking these systems with the El Nino pattern. So I think that's going to do it for our episode today. Thanks so much for your insight, Grant. It's been awesome having you on Tracking the Tropics today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and thanks so much for tuning in.
Yeah, and of course, you can always watch past episodes of Tracking the Tropics. Every single episode of Tracking the Tropics is up right now on trackingthetropics.tv. You can also listen to them on your favorite podcast streaming service, and those are all up as well if you just want to maybe go back and kind of see how the season has evolved, because it's certainly been an interesting one, Rebecca, that I think a lot of people are going to end up studying in the years to come.
Yes, we are going to be constantly looking at how the wind shear and the sea surface temperatures really shaped this season.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for Rebecca, for Grant, for myself. We will see you next week at 12:30 on Tracking the Tropics.
Find Tracking the Tropics on these platforms. And for storm updates, the latest models, and helpful resources, visit trackingthetropics.tv.